Welcome to another edition of Point Taken, where we engage with eminent figures across sectors in Hong Kong on key issues facing the region. The Professional Teachers Union in Hong Kong disbanded earlier this month after mounting criticism from authorities and government officials on the group's history of subversive, anti-China activities and potential other illicit behavior. A few days later, the Civil Human Rights Front group decided to fold as well, with both entities having close ties prior. My guest today is Dr. Daniel Vukovich, an associate professor at the University of Hong Kong School of Humanities and director of the MA program in Literary and Cultural Studies, who will shed light on how we got to this stage of the PTU becoming overly problematic and what are the implications. Dr. Vukovich, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Would you say that the PTU has held a monopoly on the education system in Hong Kong with anti-China sentiment?
It's had a monopoly, I suppose, in the sense that it's been the largest teacher union. So it's been kind of powerful, influential in that regard. Although that in itself is not the issue. I think that my take on this from what's happened has been that union, much like the rest of Hong Kong, has really kind of transformed and changed a lot over the last several years from its origins. So, in the beginning, it was founded by Zito Hua, who was a kind of major figure in Hong Kong's political history and was known for being both a kind of ardent Democrat and a patriotic figure as well. He was respected despite certain political differences. He was still respected on basically both sides of the border, right? And his view, I believe, was that the union should not get overtly politicized or involved in a kind of anti-China politics or struggle. And at any rate, his vision, I think, in the early history of that union was that it was more of a kind of typical union focused primarily on the workplace, right? And on protecting the teachers/workers and their well-being and their pay and their benefits and so on. And then also its role in educational policy, which it certainly should have and did have a kind of role in, right? But of course, he passed away now several years ago. And even really, I think by the end of his life and time, he was getting kind of savaged by the League of Social Democrats at that point over a kind of political difference, which I think was kind of unfair, actually. But at any rate, that kind of history happened, basically, where you get the rise of kind of the Civil Human Rights Front group that the PTU was involved in with very many others. And that group itself kind of changed from its origins to getting involved in essentially a kind of regime change kind of politics aimed at the mainland, and it kind of escalated or radicalized its efforts in politics. It's really about 2019 and the form that protest movement took, by late July, August, and kind of beyond, right? And so that the union's involvement with that group kind of came back to haunt it.
From some schools, and would you say as a result that there is a lack of understanding of Hong Kong's history, specifically colonial history and Chinese history, amongst some of the Hong Kong youth in the city?
Yeah, sure. I think I think so, right? And so it's a really kind of larger issue, right? Therefore, than even just the union, which at some levels that's going to be an organizational question, like who's overseeing this, who has control over the syllabus, is there kind of vetting process? Basically, is there some accountability for what happens? So when humans make mistakes, or maybe they don't know enough for the right things, or they're wrong about something, there needs to be some kind of process of accountability and correction going on there, right? So, I mean, the subject of Hong Kong's experience under colonialism, in some ways, is a surprisingly undermined and unknown thing. It's kind of explained away or almost glossed over, right? As if a lot of the the colonial ideology of the time, that this was a totally hands-off and non-impactful form of colonialism.
You've been a professor and scholar in Hong Kong for a long time, and I want to get your opinion on the general discussions overall involving nuanced understanding and meaningful inclusion of China's cultural history at a higher level in the academia in the city, including if much of is being told from just Chinese-sourced perspective of academia. Would you say that there is enough of that, or it's more particularly one-sided sort of discussion right now, specifically in the liberal arts?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great topic I'm more concerned with. I've been part of it in some ways. So I think the good news is that when I started here in late 2006, there was little of it, right? Like it seemed to me, at any rate, not that much, particularly in the kind of liberal arts and sciences or humanities. It wasn't taught that often, right? There was a lot of stuff on Hong Kong, some on the Western world. There's some stuff on China, but not particularly on modern China, not on colonialism or imperialism in China, or the rise of China, or Hong Kong under China. So I think it's imperative to do more to bring on board the kind of what I would call the self-understanding of China itself from within China, right? Which is not just one way. There's a great richness and diversity of views and debates happening in Chinese academia, right? But that, let's call it the discourse or self-understanding of China, or in the plural, understandings, isn't necessarily brought on board very much, right? So it does tend to, the story of China kind of gets told overall in kind of predictable ways, as essentially of, we're talking about politics and social history. So the question is, how does China understand its own past and history in its scholarship and in its diversity and things like that? And can we bring those texts and those perspectives on board, right? And I think we can, and I think we need to do more of that. I would put it this way. I think that there's actually grounds for some kind of guarded optimism, really, about, I think, the future of education across the board in Hong Kong and in Hong Kong in general, right? I think that if we can bring in more diverse views from China or about China, that's a huge step forward. And I think that it has, in some ways, at least at the university level, it's already been happening a bit. I think it's something that can be encouraged and maybe now go forward here in the future.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.